That's the one.
mark. Cobwebs twine and shadows dance in this twilight somber trance. Candles flicker, weary wicks, ancient echoes, time's cruel tricks. Marble figures, frozen pose, amidst the silence sorrow grows. Whispering shadows, secrets keep in the depths where night meets sleep. Underneath the velvet gloom, guardians of the haunted room. Chandeliers in crystal tears reflect forgotten yesteryears, softly chanting distant cries. Through the arches sorrow sighs. Gargoyles watch with stony gaze, guardians of endless maze. Pipe organ's breath begins to rise, filling air with mournful ties. Whispering shadows, secrets keep in the depths where night meets sleep. Underneath the velvet gloom, guardians of the haunted room.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to WBPL 76. I am Lady Red of the Black Pants Legion, and we're doing more Shoal nonsense this week. And hopefully everything's working. I can see a lot of the usual suspects have rolled in. And I also have the usual suspects on Discord. Say hi, fellas.
Hi, fellas.
Lictor's hiding from
Hello.
us. There he is.
There, I will pop out. Hello.
So I have grabbed Aiden and I have grabbed Lictor for us to talk about nonsense, as we like to do every Friday. Thank you guys all for joining us to start off the weekend and witter about whatever silliness takes us this week. How are we doing, chat? How is everybody?
Yeah.
And how is
Tell
Lictor and how is Aiden?
I am speaking to you from a new house. I had moved.
And did the move go smoothly?
No more questions.
So it was a move, okay.
No, most everything went fine.
That's good. Well, I hope
My
the new
new-
place is lovely.
It is. I have a wonderful view to the ocean.
Oh, that's very nice to hear. And I don't know if chat can hear in the background, but the dogs are doing fine. You can tell because they're screaming at each other while playing Bitey Face.
Yes, and Saris is staring at me during this process.
Hopefully they won't be too much trouble this week while we're doing things. Okay, so I
Is
can
that
see we've got Ed, we've got Hickmanistan, we've got Wilf, we've got Night Owl, we've got Blackfire Gaming, where I do need to start with a thing that Blackfire did that I should have done last week and didn't because 2 hours just suddenly disappears and I don't know what happens to it. Quinless says
yes?
they've been consuming too many bad novels, need to see some creation to be inspired. Bad novels are great though because for all having good examples and advice and things where people tell you should do things this way and you should do this and you should do that, it's also really important to have and here's why you shouldn't do this, here is why this is a really bad idea, this is what it looks like in motion, and now you can feel how bad this book is, don't do this. I do like me some bad examples, plus they can be really funny. One of my favourite terrible books is Model Land by Tyra Banks, which is categorically a bad book, but it is so creative and it's bad. It's one of those books that I feel like everybody should read because it's just unique. So I do appreciate some bad books. Bad books can be good.
Bad books. Bad books, good books.
Good
They
books can
shape
also
you.
be bad because it gets one of the things we talked about last week was the Tolkien problem, where because Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are so good, it kind of defined the genre for what certain character archetypes should be and how things should look, and you get to the point where either you're abiding by that precedent that was set by such a good book, or you're deliberately ignoring it to the point where its shadow's still looming over you anyway. So good books can also be bad because they can restrain your creativity because you feel like you must do a certain thing to be considered good yourself. So
Can I provide a pup date real
you
quick?
can provide a pup date. What is happening?
Pip and Anka have Saris pinned on her back. Saris is chewing on Pip's jowls. Anka is seeing if the nipples work again and getting kicked in the face for it. Little girl, that's a dry well. It's been a dry well for months.
But she lives in hope. She remembers when that was wonderful and the best thing. Oh, web novel bad? Yeah, okay, that's a unique kind of bad. Model Land at least got published and had someone proofread grammar and sentence construction. That's not always necessarily a guarantee, because if you look at Twilight, not the first Twilight book, but some of the later ones, if they had an editor on them, they weren't doing their job well, let's put it that way, because some of the grammar and sentence construction in those books is abysmal. And Handbook for Mortals also exists, though admittedly the publishing for Handbook for Mortals was shady AF.
Extremely.
All right, well, we've opened with talking about some terrible things. Do we want me to... no, actually, I know what we'll do. I've got a little bit of writing that Blackfire did a couple of weeks ago. Not last week, but the week before. We'll use that as our transition into moving into Shoal proper this week. But I thought we might start our first hour out by talking about conflict and war and fighting in novels in general before we moved into looking at that topic for Shoal this week. Because last week we really focused on looking at what we decided for our technology, seeing if we agreed with where we were at. There were a few changes you guys all suggested, which I haven't written up yet. Girls, please. Anka has opinions. We settled all of our technology last week.
My God, she has opinions.
She does, and they're very shrill. And we figured that we'd need to have at least one war, and I think we're going to go for, multiple significant conflicts that we need to think about as we begin moving into our sort of culture analysis. We're probably going to have a look at our races and see if we need to tweak anything there. I wanted to do some writing up this week, but other things have taken priority because there's something I'm trying to get done for Sunday. I've been doing wrestling posters, and I'm pretty proud of where they're coming along. The line art for Cargonia is done. I can show you guys if you're interested, but that took my focus, and I figured I'd do a big write-up this coming Friday, potentially, as it may be that we don't stream next week. So... wonder if you meant conflict as in tension between characters or conflict as in hitting things with a sword. We can talk about both, because both are very, very important. Put Anka on, we need more pups. The problem with Anka when she gets opinions is because she's still a puppy, she is incredibly shrill and will just blow out eardrums. She can be, just a little tiny bit of a problem. So we're not going to put her directly on the mic, unintentionally. All right. So one of the hardest things in writing, and there's a lot of hard things in writing, but something that can be really, really difficult is writing conflict. And the hardest part, in my opinion, is writing conflict at like the ground level, where you're actually trying to write a fight. I don't know if either of my lovely co-hosts have any opinions on bad or good writing they've seen with regards to that, but it's one of the areas that could be a problem. You wanna go ahead, Aiden?
Oh boy, do I. And this is one that's gotten me into a couple arguments in the past with people who really enjoyed the author's work I'm about to describe. But you know who really just kind of bothers me as far as their ability to write fight sequences?
Is it Ari Salvatore?
It is
Please
100%.
please don't say our self. Okay, go ahead. Hit me over the head.
Okay. I take it you're a fan of their work.
No.
Oh, okay, cool. Then that makes this easier. Honestly, my problem, I read the Dark Elf trilogy, and then I walked away feeling thoroughly confused and disappointed because for all he was trying to describe this elven ranger who was a badass with dual swords, capable of, becoming the Whirligig 9000 that can blend through threats big and small, he describes the attacks as entering into an attack routine or an attack pattern. It's like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, what does that even
you done
fucking
fencing?
mean?
Have you done fencing?
No, and that's kind of my point, though. If it requires specialist knowledge to understand the basic mental picture of what a character is doing, then you are writing for a specialist audience. That is not what the Dark Elf trilogy was for. The Dark Elf trilogy was general purpose audience for, fantasy lovers. So writing fights in a way that only people who have been who are knowledgeable in fencing will understand, as opposed to every D&D nerd ever. The dude clearly did not understand his audience.
True. The dude, in a rebuttal of a sort, I will say that it was evocative enough to make you keep on reading. So it was serviceable. It just wasn't excellent.
It was evocative enough. See, I won't even agree with that. I read everything in spite of how he described the fight sequences. The other bits of it at the time were the interesting part. I basically skipped all of the fights after I realized I wasn't going to understand or care for them.
I don't share your basic understanding because I did the fencing and the martial arts before reading it. So to me, it was. And Ali Salvatore did pull into his writing the knowledge that he had, like Archon here is saying, like Archon is saying, they tend to they tend to pour in and overestimate what everyone else is. Of course, everyone understands what what block number 6 means when you're using foil and how it won't apply to a saber. Of course.
So, and then I'm going to throw a counter to this because I'm I'm not going to say that Salvatore is a bad author because he's certainly competent.
That's okay. I will.
I mean,
I have
don't
opinions.
Like him. I don't like his work, but I won't say that he's bad because I've certainly read far worse.
He's certainly not the worst. I don't care for him for a variety of reasons that I feel are pretty fundamental to good writing, but he's not Tyra Banks. He's not Lanny Sarum. He's not Stephanie Meyer. His level of bad comes from a place of good. So.
Yeah. So, Heckmanistan, allow me to put it this way. I understood enough, but it didn't tell me enough to paint a mental image so much as it kind of told me in D&D terms, this is what just happened.
And put a pin in that thought, because that's what I'm going to come back to when you're done.
Okay. To counter that, I point out the Eisenhorn trilogy with Dan Abnett, who also uses jargon in describing his sword fighting. Granted, I don't know if it's genuine fencing as much as he makes up some maneuvers and styles. But one thing that he goes out of his way to do is when he's introducing the sword arts that Eisenhorn learns and utilizes, he describes what the motions are, at least when he introduces the particular maneuver or attack. So that way, later on, when he when he just uses the term, you already have the base understanding for exactly how the sword and the body are moving to do the thing. It's like in a technical publication, how whenever you use an acronym, you in parentheses fill out the whole what the acronym means, and then you can just use the acronym for the rest of the work. Abnett treated it very similarly, and I think if Salvatore had done something like that, I would have less objection to his ability to write conflict as far as, personal combat.
I think that's got some good observations in it, and I completely understand where you're coming from. And in terms of sort of, wittering about writing and, trying to make this a somewhat educational, podcasty bit of nonsense that we do, where we share not just what we like and what we don't like, but how to get from one to the other and vice versa. One of the things that I find really interesting, as just somebody who's interested in stories and all their mediums, is how certain mediums handle certain things better than others, and the benefit that can come from adapting one medium into another to do what you're trying to do in the best way possible. One of the things that I've talked about on this stream in the past that I've found very impressive was when a comic book was adapting a novel, and how they took a particular scene from the novel where a lot of descriptive weight was put on a moment in time that helped you to understand the personalities of several characters in that scene, and translated it into effectively a still image of several panels in a comic book. And how you translate that very clear and defined emphasis in the narrative, where you've got all these words that you can use to make sure that people get the point. How do you translate that into a couple of pictures where you're keeping the subtle things subtle and the important things important, but making sure that nothing gets missed? That can be a really difficult thing to do. When it comes to writing a fight scene, the opposite is the way that I think people should go. Comic books are amazing at writing fight scenes because of the limitations of the medium that they're in. With a comic book, when you're writing a fight, you cannot show every single punch and strike. Otherwise, a fight would, make a comic 3 times larger than it currently is. And you've got deadlines to meet, and there's art that needs to be done, and you have to think about where are your dialogue bubbles going to go, if they're going to be there. Do you need to add sound effects and motion effects? What is the most important part of this fight that we're going to depict? And how do we make the weight of everything that leads up to that moment and follows that moment, or leads into another moment that we need to show? How are we going to make those design decisions to lay out our comic book page? I feel that when you're writing a book, you need to have that same approach. What makes a fight cool is not, in fact, the different katas or rhythms or strikes or hits that a character is going to use in your descriptive narrative. Nobody is going to care about whether you used position 4 or an overhead strike or whatever it is that you're doing. What people care about is the impact, what it means to the person delivering the blow and the person receiving the blow, and the overall stakes of why this fight is happening and how this goes forwards. So what you're looking for is, I want to depict the key hits. These need to be described so that we know that, motion is happening. But where you need to be is inside the reason for the conflict, the purpose for the conflict, the result of the conflict. Is the character who is doing the overhead strike, are they struggling? Are they injured? Are they panting? Are they in pain? Are they thinking about their wife that they're trying to protect? Those are the elements that's going to give the fight weight. And comics are really, really good at doing that, especially when you've got, the comic book trope of being able to show internal monologue that was sort of, pioneered and really perfected by the Spider-Man comics. And I feel that that's where you get your good fight scenes come from. And see what chat has to say. Descriptions.
I'm going to weigh in.
Yeah, go for it. Please do.
And say that a good fight also is a wonderful way to illustrate something about the world, about differences between characters. I've just finished reading the third time through the series of books named Cradle by Will White, it's a wuxia sort of a story, and the entire system of the world is depicted through the struggles and conflicts of characters. And the beautiful thing about writing is everything pours into it. They have layers of physicality, of magic, of whatever systems they have. And it all pours into how they do whatever they do and why they do it. Mm-hmm. And pulling a little bit from game design, not exactly story design, but adjacent, I think. Good fights in games are fights with objectives, not just bash, 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 bash. It's hard to be invested in a Mortal Kombat game. It might be fun as a skill, but it's not emotionally invested.
At least until you get to Mortal Kombat 11, where they wrote a really good story and that changed. But yeah, you're completely right. And Mortal Kombat has just the fighting game problem as well of, we want these two characters to fight, and now we need a contrived thing for them to say in order for them to do so. There's no weight there.
Exactly. But let's put them the other way. Let's look at things like XCOM, which invested in the idea that you have an objective, you have a time limit, and you need to do something. It's not about marmalizing all the aliens on board. It's more about get objective, defuse that bomb, make these, release these hostages, whatever. The fight is a means to an end. And same thing in a fight, same thing in a story.
Yes.
You're not just in a fight. They're trying to do something.
You have to have stakes, and the stakes have to be what you're pushing.
There is one exception to that, but it's only because it's treated as an exception that I think it works. Sometimes you have a character who just wants to fight for the sake of fight, and that's all there is. There is no objective.
What you would tend to have there is who are they fighting? Yeah.
Well, what you have there is either who they're fighting is the important thing, or you use that as a juxtaposition of their absence of objective versus the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And you kind of use the pointlessness of it as an illustration of a larger picture.
Yep.
It only works if it is an exception, not a rule.
Yep.
But that goes back to what we've said multiple times, which is, there are no hard rules for
you could
writing.
always break a rule. You just have to be aware of why the rule works before you break it so that you're doing something meaningful with it. Chat's had some good things to say. Heckmanistan said,
I will be right back. I gotta let the
Go
dogs
for
out.
it. The other interesting thing about fight scenes in comics that helps in the hyperfocus on hands, showing the hands and positions allows the mind to fill in the blanks based on understanding mechanics automatically. That's absolutely true. Good writing, you don't have to tell people every single tiny intimate detail in case they miss it. You need to understand that your audience is hopefully an intelligent thinking body, and that what can make a written narrative as opposed to a visual narrative interesting for a reader is allowing them to have that scope of personal imagination to fill in the gaps. So yes, leaving those sort of little branching elements where, you know, one thing leads to another, and we're not going to describe that bridge, we're going to let you just, you know, figure it out in your own head and what that looks like. That's engaging the reader. So yes, you're absolutely right on that, Hickmanistan. I.E. Geth said, I think there are two ends of the spectrum for fight scenes. On one side you get the blow-by-blow bullet time description, and on the other you have shaky cam, tinnitus, cinematic style. You can go with either in the reading, but choosing the descriptive style can depend on the character. I think you're right, but what makes you right in terms of that, in my opinion, is the last part you said there, is choosing the descriptive style depending on the character. What you're doing is you're pushing, you know, one side or the other, or maybe somewhere in the middle, based on the character and how the character sees the world, how the character sees fighting, how the character approaches being in conflict. And having a strong juxtaposition where you're describing from one person's point of view, where it's very tick-tock, by the book, blow-by-blow bullet time, versus another character who's running on pure adrenaline from moment to moment and missing the stuff in between because it's just instinct, that can make for a very compelling narrative as well. So I think that's also a good point that you brought up, is that you can go either way. And to bring this back to where we started with R.A. Salvatore, that's where I feel his writing for me falls down, is I just don't feel like I care about the interpersonal investment and stakes. And it's what you see, and this is not to say Salvatore's on this level, but if you go into fan fiction and a lot of people's early writing, you will quite often see you get this description of a blow by blow, but with nothing that description is attached to. There's no interpersonal investment. It's just, I am describing the very technical, I'm starting here and I'm going here and I'm moving to that, and I want you to know that I'm doing this really cool big blow. It's not really cool in a big blow if you don't have context to why it matters, whether that's a character reason or a larger narrative reason, or because, you know, we've got to get through this fight so that we can stop the bomb before it explodes. You need to have that external context to go with it. The only time that advice completely doesn't apply, in my opinion, is if you are doing communal, forum-based RP role-playing. Because then the other person needs to know exactly what you're describing so they can respond applicably. But that's such a niche, specific way of writing that it doesn't sort of apply to the general overall that I'm wittering on about. Hello, Ramshackle. How are you? Go on, Lictor.
I am going to answer to Bully Snake that orcs may fight because it's fun.
Yep.
But the reason his orc ship, the greenest of the green, Gazgul Maguruthraka, is interesting, and why he gets all the gubbins and the Goodwood things is because he has a reason. He is the prophet of the wall, and
Gazgul does have a personality to go along with his violence. Yes,
it's not just a meme with a hat; it's an actual story. Now,
plus, you also have the whole universe around the orcs. The orcs do not exist in a vacuum. They exist as one faction among a lot of very political other factions where, you know, I say political, religion is kind of fitting in here as well, but, you know, humanity and the Tau and the Eldar cannot possibly work together because of political and religious differences, and that there's all of these things going on and we don't trust them and we can't trust them, and these guys fight in this way and these guys fight in this way, and then you plop the orcs down in the middle who are just like, look, we don't care, we'll fight all of you. That's just what we're here for. They wouldn't work as well if they just existed on their own in a vacuum.
And yet orcs do work with everyone, and everyone works with everyone, and unholy alliances are the bread and butter of the setting, which is again beautiful.
Yes. You've
Um,
again got that stakes, that personality, that external build around the conflict to make it meaningful. And I personally feel that the 40k books that are the most boring are the ones that embrace the there is only war and stick with only that. And never look at the greater picture of, well, why is there only war? How does that affect individual people? If it's just about, oh, well, we must do this fight because that is what we do, we just fight, that's boring. We must do this
yep,
fight because in spite of this, or because of that, or in hopes of this, is where the interest is.
That makes me
correct.
think of C.S. Goto's Bloodraven trilogy, which was meant to be Dawn of War, the video game, the
Yeah,
original video game, but he really just over focused on fighting, 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 fighting without any emphasis on, well, most anything else. It was kind of an afterthought. That works great for an RTS where the bulk of your gameplay is base building and combat in between narrative story beats, but that's a much more interactive medium, the video game, so it doesn't work when that's all you're doing in your writing.
translation between mediums is not automatic, and it has to be done. Even between short form uh, movie to a series is incredibly hard. A
Yes.
televised series, not to mention between live action and animation, and then you go to comic book, and then you go to words only.
I
By
mean,
Jove.
let's discuss, for example, a story that took an RTS and actually made a interesting novel about it. Um, StarCraft has a series of novels that came out. This is before StarCraft 2, mind you. This is
Yeah.
StarCraft 1 and Brood War. The first novel, Liberty's Crusade, basically follows through the entire Terran campaign of the original StarCraft from the
Mhm.
perspective of Michael Liberty, the Galactic News Network reporter who on Marsara fell in with Jim Raynor and his guys. And he was there fighting alongside Jim Raynor, the main character of the Terran campaign, from the very start all the way to Minsk's betrayal at the end of that particular campaign arc. And
In New Gettysburg, yeah.
exactly. And instead of focusing on the play by play of this is how the in game missions went, it was much more character focused on how are the characters taking the events that are unfolding, how are they operating, what is going on, and it works a lot better because anytime that they do describe when the Marines are trying to gun down Zerg or fight against the Confederate troops or fend off the Protoss, there's context. The fights are short, they're sweet, they're to the point. They don't get overly into the weeds about the tactical particulars of playing StarCraft. And then it continues on with this is how the characters are taking in the situation and handling it. Very different approach, but that's where somebody translated the video game into the written word well, because I mean, it's not high literature, but it's good.
Oh, yeah. Hey,
We'll give
What
this just.
happened?
I can tell you exactly what happened. Anka, would you like to tell chat what you just did?
What did she
She
do?
just jumped on my lap. I'm very sorry for your ears, Wilf. Anka just jumped on my lap and laid down and stuck her nose on the F2 button, which is my hotkey for the scene transition from my opening screen to, main scene. Hence why you guys just got blasted with the opening again. I'm very sorry. That was Anka. She decided she is in control of the stream now.
the jump she did from one couch to the other, by the way, if y'all have ever seen what a fox does when it's trying to find something buried under snow, the nose first leap, that is what Anka just did from the
Yes.
one couch to land between her
Quinn.
grandma's legs on the other couch.
Quinn has demanded the petting.
I am, in
Perform.
fact, administering the petting. She is getting ear scritches. But yes, that was Sarah. Sarah's decided we needed to
Not
restart
Anka,
stream.
that was
Anka,
Anka.
sorry. It was Anka.
Saris is who
Black-
I'm giving pets to for
Yes.
Blackfire's sake.
Blackfire Gaming also redeemed the pet.
As
Also
did Ed.
Edgar's.
Oh, all the pets. All the pets for the
All
puppers.
right,
the
let me
pets.
reach over and I'll get Pip as
This
well.
just
That's
means
3
you guys are
dogs
going to
and
think
3
this is the
pets.
right thing to do, and you're going to keep doing this.
3 dogs
And
3
Night
pets.
Owl. More pets.
Oh my god, I'm out of hands and dogs. I'm not petting Lady Red. She's way over there.
Please
and
don't.
She might not appreciate it.
Can we talk
Very good.
very quickly and very briefly about the greatest fight scene that has been committed to cinema and the fact that it was the result of a horrible case of diarrhea?
Yes.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones.
That is such a fun character moment.
It is a perfect character moment because, and it is just that wonderful subversion of, the cinematic fight, the over description, the being flowery for the sake of being flowery, because you've got the bad guy who's building up with his sword to do epic nonsense, and in the script it was written that epic nonsense was supposed to happen. Except Harrison Ford had a horrible case of deli belly and needed to go to the bathroom, and made the very wise decision that in Indiana Jones's shoes, he'd just pull out his gun and shoot the guy.
Yeah.
Which is just such a wonderful character moment for displaying how Indy approaches the world. And it's just great.
He has this oh fuck this look on his face, and then kablam. It's just like I mean, since we're talking Harrison Ford, Han shot first being an important piece of character development. That
Yes.
the moment they tried to make it so that Greedo shot first, they undermined the fact that Han is a down and dirty rapscallion who will absolutely shoot first if it's to his own benefit.
And the
Because-
reason why the fans cared so much about that potential edit and etc. is because fights are character moments. That
Yes.
entire scene says so much about Han, the world he lives in, about Greedo as well and his character, for all that he's only there for a brief time, and messing with it means you've messed with character development, and of course that's going to upset people.
Because Han has such a important character development arc, because he is the I'm only in it for the money, I will shoot first, criminal underbelly dwelling roughneck and rogue, who eventually becomes the unwilling hero later on, and then becomes the hero by the end of the trilogy. Like, even ignoring the rest of his character arc from Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the whole reason Han coming back in the Millennium Falcon to save Luke's ass during the Death Star trench run meant so much is because they spent so much time building Han up to not be the kind of guy to do that shit. They spent so much time for him to be the I'm in it for me. I'm only in this for one person, princess. Me is the quote. So that when he does the reluctant "May the Force be with you" before Luke takes off, and then comes back at the end, is the big payoff to all that. If you undermine the selfish motivation at the very beginning, you undermine all of what makes the future payoff so impactful. And that's another big thing about trying to do good conflict, is if you're trying to get a payoff for a conflict. I'm going to use another character that I love to rip on real quick, and I've done this TED Talk in both the Aux and the Legion multiple times. Battletech. Jihad era. Devlin motherfucking Stone, I think, is the worst thing to happen to that era of Battletech writing, because none of the payoff he gets was earned. The whole thing is he shows up out of a Ward of Blake prison camp, rallies the guys, stages the Great Escape, and then by some means, basically gets gifted the keys to the kingdom by every successor state except the Capellans to lead all of their armies to attack the Word of Blake, retake Terra, and then establish a neutral, overseer nation built around Terra, and everybody except the Capellans give him a large chunk of their territory to build up this nation. At no point does he ever stumble. At no point does he ever suffer any kind of failure that's anything more than a minor inconvenience. He doesn't take any major strategic or tactical defeats. Contrast that to some of the earlier characters, like Wolf's Dragoons getting the absolute fuck beat out of them multiple times in their history, despite being the writer's favorite. Victor Steiner Davian getting his ass handed to him a couple times leading up to Twycross. And then that makes his success at Twycross actually mean something and have impact because, A, we spent all this time building up how difficult this is going to be, how much failure this character has experienced trying to do this kind of thing, that when he gets it right and he wins, holy shit, that's monumental. Like, conflict requires stakes. If there is no risk of loss or no demonstration that there are consequences if things don't play out in the character's favor, then you don't care. It's like, oh,
Okay.
woo, the Super Space Marine Superman's killed another 100 Elfdar after he punched out the Avatar of Cain. Woo, I don't care. Zero fucks to give because, well, we know it's going to happen because you've shown us absolutely no reason to believe anything other than that could occur.
Aiden,
And
Aiden,
yes,
Aiden, wet your
yes.
whistle. Pistol demands your water break.
Yes, we must
Nah,
water
fair
break.
enough.
I completely agree with
one-
you, though.
I want to make one last final point to this train of thought before I do so and cede my time. It can be valuable to have a character who has the meteoric rise with no failures, that never seems to be stopped or stumbled, that always ends up coming out on top in the vein of Devlin Stone. It can be done in a way that is compelling.
Yes.
Typically, the way that you make it compelling is when you pull the rug out from under their feet at a critical moment and have to show the audience what happens when a character has to experience failure for the literal first time in their life, and then everything that comes from that experience, because that is a really big kick in the balls for somebody who has never known failure. But unless you're doing something like that, having the absence of threat or stakes just undermines the whole point of doing a conflict or a story.
Chat has brought up both Mary Sue and Gary Stu characters as being tied into this, and yes, that is a second trope that often feeds into this. Go on, Lictor, what were you going to say?
I'm going to push away from the Mary Sue and Gary Stu, and I'm going to say something else.
Go for it.
We've been danced around the concept of stakes. There is a definition in the books. There is a definition to the word drama. Drama is tension and resolution.
Yes.
If you don't build tension, you can't have a resolution.
Yes.
A tension is something that happens that you have stakes in. You can lose, or things may shift in a significant manner to the characters. It doesn't have to be death, life, loss, or limb. Or, heavens forbid, someone gets sugar in their tea. I'm looking at you, Jane Austen.
But in Jane Austen's defense, sugar in tea is a war crime.
Look, as a practical expert on the subject, I agree. But let's step away from inflammatory language for a second and consider the absolute dastardly guys who add both lemon and milk at the same time.
Oh my god!
My God.
I'm coming down with a case of the vapors. I may need to step outside.
Exactly. And so I will go forward and say, we need tension. We need drama, and we like drama because without it, it's bland. It's the spice we like. Which, if you'll allow me to reroute this conversation back
Go
to
for it.
Shoal
Yes, by all
for a
means.
second, we wanted to go to war.
Yes, I feel
Tonight.
like the Shoal needs to have had conflicts for it. It wouldn't make sense for them not to have fallen into conflict prior to human
And
interaction.
It's the
And in-
angle of ingenuity right there. Conflict drives that.
Correct. Or at least that's an interesting way to look at things. I would go so far as to ask the question to our chat, most beloved, and to my compatriots, of course. What? Not in the wider manner, because we live as a historian, as someone who there is the problem of trying to blame everything about wider social pressures that make all wars inevitable. Oh, there was a famine there. There was an overgrowth of geopolitical power over there. It had to happen. There was no other way. There had to be a war. This side would have won. Very deterministic, very bland. What if on Shoal, in our story, because this is supposed to be a story in the end, not just
Once we get the
a-
setting finished, my intention is to write a novel with chat, which is going to be an experience.
Yes, we plan to do a lot of things, but as a setting, won't it be more interesting to see and understand it if there was a conflict, an actual conflict, and not just a series of diagrams that please historians so much? Like, it's not just the demographics of point
Yeah.
A and the rise to popularity of religion F. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, the Iliad is so compelling because of the human and divine story behind it.
When it comes to conflicts, I think in terms of what will end up going in the compendium, it will probably be quite dry as historians like it, because that's kind of the way that we are as a species. Is when we're trying to codify things and put them into boxes so that other people can draw from them, we tend to simplify down, we tend to find the largest common denominator and stick that label on, because that allows us to grab information and use it to extrapolate future things and etc. But you're completely right that on a personal level, nothing is ever that simple. Life does not fit into helpful conformist little boxes. And the closer you are to a conflict, the harder it is to have that grander view, to put a nice label on it and stick something in a box. It's very easy to say, oh, but for this happening in 1914, World War I wouldn't have happened, because we're now, X number of years past that. Those of us who are probably sat here today, none of us obviously remember it and may not have known anybody who was involved. But if you were to talk to, veterans who were part of that conflict, it's going to be a completely different story for them. They can't put it into those boxes and, but for this one thing happening in 1914, that wasn't why they personally got involved in the war. It was much more complicated than that. So distance from the time frame where something happened, I think, changes how we talk about it, how we feel about it, and how what's going on. But it's also, as Lichter is saying, very important to remember that nothing is ever that simple, even if we record it that way. So I think in terms of the compendium, what we'll probably have is quite a dry, this was sort of the general driving factor as to why this happened. But when we choose to have characters engage with those conflicts, or survivors of those conflicts, or if we decide to write a story where a large-scale conflict is occurring, those personal things need to come in. That complexity and confusion and a plethora of other reasons why bad stuff happens all needs to be there, so that we can build those stakes and that interest and that engagement that makes it mean something.
Well, yeah.
I'm going to count. Please let me just quick counter.
Sure.
I'm reading what Wilf is saying, and Wilf is absolutely correct, along with Samurai, and Hackminston as well. The way I'm looking at it, I'm saying let's try, and this is a suggestion, of course. I'm suggesting that we have events and facts rather than assumptions of what made what happen. We can have these illusions, we can have this as an addition, but we had that series of technological developments happen. And then trade talks between the forge masters and the kelp growers and the cave dwellers. The trade has broken down due to a series of piratical actions disrupting trade routes, and this made the invention of a powerful exploratory venture group to protect the trade routes, and that military expansion prompted larger and larger military expenditure because it worked. And then it became a wider conflict because other forces felt threatened and took every such venture as more and more intrusive into their domains, and then etc., etc., etc. But something happened. There was a rolling stone. It wasn't an inevitability. It was a chain reaction that people lived through, that the Shoalies
Yes. I
had
really like
been
that way of
through.
putting it. A chain reaction rather than an inevitability. That's a really good way of summing that up.
I mean,
So,
that's
Okay.
how
go
that's
on.
how conflicts all are. Is it's never
Yes,
one
but it's not
thing.
always recorded that way. So that's something to bear in mind. But going back to what Wilf said, discovery of lava tubes leads to technological advance. Forge masters have the weapon advantage, but low food availability, and conflict becomes a thing because of that. One of the things that I've been thinking about over the last week is we know our podlands have access to deep water metal deposits. One of the things I thought that might be something that we might like to look at and think about as a addendum to what will effectively be, the Forge Wars, where technology has this sudden and distinct shift. What if we end up with something of a civil war among the podlands, where you've got those who are happy to mine for and provide to the Forge Masters, but you've also got podlands who are like, no, we need to cut them off because of what's happening, and are perhaps willing to provide to the other Shoaly races, especially if they decide to form an alliance to deal with the Forge cities. You then get a race that has a cultural split, a cultural civil war. How does that feed into things? How does that feed into their development? Do you end up with podlands even these centuries later who still remember when the red shells allied themselves with the Forge cities, and we of course didn't, and vice versa? So we've got a lot to talk about there. Before we fully slide into it, which, we're about to hit that point and we want to do that, I'm going to get up and take a brief bio break and have a drink. I've got something from Blackfire I want to read, and then I think we need to dig into this and actually make some notes for Shoal. So if you guys are okay to handle chat for me for just a moment, I will be right back.
She's making a bold assumption, ladies and gentlemen.
She left you to me.
I know.
This is gonna be great. So
It's gonna be good.
I'm going to preempt everything and say I'm going to want a conflict that is multi-layered and multi-directional, where everyone are doing everything against everything all at once. The best part about Roman wars was the part where the Romans were deeply embroiled in civil war, fought several expansionist wars at the same time,
Oh yeah.
and it all went down at the same time, sometimes by the same people, operating for the same factions against themselves all over the place. It's a glorious time to be confused about things. Also,
Absolutely.
at least two different rulers or factions should have the exact same name, just to confuse everyone.
Makes sense. I mean, that's something that happens in war as a whole is confusion becomes the first and greatest impact of any war breaking out. Suddenly, nobody really fully knows what the fuck is going on because some shenanigans are occurring, and it means that there's always room for error, for misunderstanding, and for mistake. I mean, you could have very potentially wars kicking off purely because somebody misunderstood, and then things just snowballed and escalated from there.
Clerical L makes taxes late by 6 months. During that time, war has been declared already.
Yeah. It could be that a critical trade was disrupted, causing critical trade of the food and
Copper
agricultural
ingots.
variety. Yeah, copper ingots. There we go. Basic material trade was disrupted by something that was not the fault of any one or another, but
That's not
somebody
true.
jumped.
We all know who's to blame for the copper ingots.
Exactly. Somebody
We-
jumps the gun, says, "Oh, it's those assholes," and it just turns into a absolute clusterfuck from there.
All
Come
right.
on, Chad.
Put a
Give me
pin
the
in
name
those
of the idiot.
thoughts.
Help
Put-
me out with the idiot. With the idiot with the copper ingots.
You're making an Ian Nasir reference,
Yeah.
yes?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I have to. I'm
Yeah.
obligated. It's in my contract.
All right. Put a pin in that for a moment. What I'm going to do, I am going to read the cool thing that Blackfire wrote, which I feel is relevant to our overarching discussions of conflict today and how people can take things. And then what we'll do is we'll move on to the Shoal document. And I think what we need to do is think about what our trigger points are going to be for things that could cause wars, which ones we want to keep if we want to get rid of any, if we want to name any great wars, and we'll just sort of work through what we think we're going to need in setting. So, this was by Mr. Blackfire, Bean Knight, who has done some wonderful green text short stories for us before, and this is another one. And this came off of the back of us discussing 3 weeks ago the fact that bankers and librarians are basically the same thing in Shoal society and incredibly powerful. So. The most ancient honoured librarian was roused from his meditations in his chambers within one of the vast coral libraries. He was a massive ceratinoid of many great cycles that had his post for generations. His void dark shell and many battle scars spoke much of his experience. He was displeased. He sensed that he was about to be disturbed. One of his attendants scuttled in with a message coral from the seers. He abided the song it contained, and it nearly shattered in the grip of his claw. This was not good. Interlopers on high, a new star in our sky. Do they wish us become dust, or do they come to offer trust? This was most disturbing indeed. His agitated psionic grumble nearly brought his attendant to the floor. Call the great council and summon the choir masters. Ready, my titan. Which I thought was a very cool way of, investigating the concept of, oh God, humanity has turned up.
Dear Coral, by the song.
New star in the sky is a very evocative way to describe it.
Isn't
Yes.
it? There's some really good language in there. If anybody wants to see that and any of the other stuff that we have going on, we have a couple of Shoal channels over in the Discord for the auxiliary. I can see Pistol linked it up above. If you're not part of the Discord, do come and join us over there. If you are part of the Discord, you can find the Shoal channel in creative writing.
Yes.
And Tired German has punched it in again. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Let's
we have been
move.
invaded by the Germans. It's good.
The Germans. Oh yeah.
Let me move down to... Okay, this is where we are going to make our conflict notes.
So I have.
Yes.
I'd like to open
Go for
with an idea that came to my brain meat. A war breaking out between, and I'm terrible with names. It's the Hodlins are the
Snail people.
snail people. I'm trying to remember the whale and shark people.
The Salashians.
Salashians, there it is. What if somebody was attempting to poach Salashians to account for a food crisis?
Yeah, and of course the fact that the personality corals grow mostly where you find Salashians in the time before that was understood. It could just be that they were trying to kill them to get to those particular corals. So there is reasons for hunting that area and that race. That could certainly be a thing. How does chat feel about that?
I mean, you get one group. At that point, we can delve into some of what Lichter is saying of wanting to have multiple elements doing multiple things for multiple reasons. You've got the guys who are wanting to raid the coral, and then you've got a third party with more military capacity being directed to hunt the Salashians because, well, we need them out of the way if we're going to raid their shit. But also, y'all are hungry, right? There's a hell of a lot of meat on those fishy boys right there. And they're
Let
only
me
barely sentient if you think about it. They don't even have their own hands.
let me let me draw you a picture. If the Salations at that point are semi-nomadic city states, each pod of them revolving around a singular repository of memory. Um, they represent tiny fortresses like the fortress towns in Germany, in what would become Germany uh, in the later Middle Ages. And they some power outside of that sphere of influence is surging out for whatever reason, food, religion, um, whatever reason. And they start rubbing against each other. There's friction in the border, there's rumors of wealth, there is the truth of wealth sometimes just across the borders. And there's some natural gap in the middle, something that's not easy to traverse. Now, Shoal being water world is hard, but if there's some sort of I don't know, a terrible leviathan or a trench that is infested with things, or just for our sake, a dead zone, a place where the quiet has taken so much of the local choral that the song is literally dead for a distinct amount of area. And now the quiet has been fading over a generation, 2 generations, three, and then the choral sings again, but it's mute, it's new, it's blank, and this new connection allows you to bridge gaps. But the wealth, the legends, the transition between one side to the other renews and instead of being and starts maybe friendly a little bit, but it grows into a violent conflict once the truth of wealth and the differences are truly established. And then a third party, the Podlands, um, begin by selling arms to all sides, and eventually a party of them become a try to broker themselves as a real power player in the region. thus making it a three-ways conflict between three different cultures, which may or may not have contact with the homeland and their own conflicts back at home, projecting into the main conflict.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
that's how
definitely
we
listening and taking that on board. What I'm also doing is trying to write at the same time what our sort of basic pressure points are that leads to those things. So, some of which you've fitted into that very understandable narrative.
one of the things that chat had brought up, and I would very much like to put in, is that factions are not monoracial.
Correct.
I think in the
Pe-
earlier days we might have some monoracial issues, either internally to a race or a race versus another race when, running into each other for the first time. It would make sense initially for there to be tension because of that. But certainly as culture develops, civilization develops, communication develops, that's early days stuff. By the time you get to the point of the Forge cities rising, you're going to have multiculturalism. So yes.
I mean,
Not only that, we're going to have factions within races, and
Yes.
we're going to have multinational, multiracial colonies evolving.
Yes.
naturally, and that's the thing. So having mono-racial culture is very much it's a shorthand, one that Dungeons and Dragons uses heavily, because it means that if you encounter the orcs, you know exactly what to expect out of them. If you encounter the dwarves, you know exactly what to expect out of them. It's excellent for simplicity's sake when you are trying to when that's not necessarily the focus and you're just trying to do fast NPC development for the sake of running a game. But it's also very lazy if you're doing anything more than just making throwaway NPCs for a game.
We are not doing Planet of the Hats. Thank you.
Exactly. Exactly. Besides which, I'm pretty sure Hat would be upset if we cloned him that many times to make a full planet.
I don't think he is going to mind. They would all be the Emperor.
That's terrifying.
True. And how you begin a Viking invasion of many other planets.
Oh,
My God.
So I've
That
listed
aside,
I've listed down a few pressure points, and we'll see if there's any that we want to add to this that I think are things that will help to define some of the conflicts between our cultures. The rise of the Forge cities we know is going to be a pressure point that's probably going to lead to a full-scale, large-scale war, because that's a massive technology shift in a short amount of time. Massive tech shift in short amount of time. Another pressure point that can lead to conflict and issues: natural disasters. It might be a natural disaster that wipes out a food source. It might interfere with a trade route. It might wipe out an established colony or change the viability of an established colony. That can lead to conflict. We know we have leviathans. Leviathan activity could very well push our different cultures into conflict with each other, either to survive the Leviathan, or because they're fleeing the Leviathan, or because one of them's managed to kill a Leviathan and are harvesting its resources. Leviathans are probably going to be a pressure point. Religious and superstitious beliefs, of which there's usually two main types. Sometimes a religion or a superstition just works of its own accord. Where people will just, for no real particular reason, decide that something is true without any particular impetus making it so. An example I've put here is it could be that people start to believe the Leviathans are working for that heretic group over there. Sometimes religion is used as a tool of governance, where it's the excuse or the motivator that's used. We want the resources of our neighbour, but we're going to make it a religious war. Coveting of wealth, whether it's precious goods, natural resources, or tech, can lead to conflict. And travel concerns. If there is a natural barrier with only one safe way through it, controlling that barrier, controlling that trade route, controlling who gets to be in a zone or doesn't, can lead to conflict. Those are the big ones that have immediately sprung to mind for me as pinch points. Are there any others you guys can think of or that chat can think of that need to go on this list before we move on?
Lichter brought up a good one in the form of quiet zones, the places that have been
Yes.
entirely blighted. It would be similar to a famine or other natural disaster in that it will change the landscape of a region and cause other pressures to mount. Quiet develops so they can't access their usual fertile waters for fish harvesting, or that's where their living space or their breeding space is, and now they can't use it anymore. Something of that
So this would be
nature.
similar to a natural disaster pressure point, but it's one of the shoal
Yes,
specific ones.
exactly.
I am going to suggest a trifecta.
Oh my.
Let's take a Leviathan.
Yep.
Let's make it a big one. Let's make it a nether god class Leviathan. The truly benthic beings that reaches up to uh, shallow into the shallows only once in a millennia or something. And this thing carries with it a blighted coral reef on its back that projects the quiet around it. In a true, not apocalyptic, there's
It's a
another name for it.
it's a mobile calamity.
It's a calamity, exactly. It's a calamity. A Leviathan that carries the quiet with it and migrates through an area, rendering it desolate. Okay? Now, this wasteland it leaves behind is opened up years later. And this research surge of society into it provides the first impetus for conflict. Now, you can have the religious crazies following this nether god and claiming to be either hurting it or following in its wake or whatever, uh, worshiping it the same way as uh, Cthulhuidic cultists. And in essence, it creates the power vacuum. Imagine one of these things wandering into a forge city, prompting it to hyper develop its weaponry. And when the calamity passes, with the quiet all around, suddenly the forge city finds itself with the weapons and technology and organization built under supreme pressure, forged in a time of incredible distress, and then let loose upon the Shoalite world.
Especially when you consider the potential reality of how does the government of this particular location justify its continued existence and mass military expenditure now that the crisis is gone? Because, frankly, they're no longer needed, but once they have absolute power over their society, their city state, are they really going to want to give that up? And then you can
Maybe
say,
they do. Maybe there's a resistance. Maybe there's an uprising. Maybe there's a lot of things, but they haven't yet. And now there has to be a war, and the quiet is gone.
yeah, you have
So
those elements of their society that insist that the thing could come back. We have to stay on war footing. And you have the other portion of their society that's like, dude, we need to focus on domestic issues because a lot of fuckery happened after this thing passed through that we cannot reconcile if we're on war footing. And you have civil strife and pressure that's built up there. And depending on which side takes the reins of authority and power dictates kind of whether or not they bleed those pressures externally or they collapse into a very internal civil conflict.
Just remember that the Attic-Delian uh, alliance passed the Persian incursion, which we all have to talk about Thermopylae 300 and all
Yep.
of that, was the excuse for Athens to take control over much of the eastern
Yes.
portion of the Mediterranean Sea. They just said, if you won't pay the taxes, we won't have the ships. Next time the Persians roll around, we won't be able to stop them. So pay up, or else.
Yeah. At which point it
Uh,
becomes state-sponsored extortion, and then you have a pressure for other city-states and air regions to chafe under that pressure of all their own. I've been playing a couple different strategy games of the Nobunaga's Ambition element, which has had me dabbling in looking up the historical figures of Warring States period Japan. And, one of the other things there is natural disasters and taxation led to some interesting conflicts between regions and the daimyo that occupied them, who may not necessarily have been present at the time because they're off campaigning against their rivals, and now at the home front, they've got unrest and rebellion building up. I mean, hell, I'm I'm sat here in the United States. One of the big sparks that kicked off the war for independence, or at least, one of the things that got the ball rolling was increased taxation in the wake of the French and Indian War that was levied on the colonies by the crown. Whether it was just or unjust is an argument that you could have, but ultimately it doesn't really matter too much because a increase of tax from a government that is some distance away prompted a bunch of people to say, "Oh hell no," and do something about it. And Wilf
yep.
is making a good comment. Roman dictators, Caesar was the big one everyone remembers, but he wasn't the first dictator, and it was a point of honor for them to step down. What happens when you get the guy who doesn't wanna?
I am taking notes from all of this as you guys talk and also paying attention to chat to fill out our pressure points. What I think we need for the compendium is to just choose a couple of these that would have caused particularly huge conflicts to be ones that we actually go into any detail about in the book. But all of these will be things that could apply to smaller conflicts or conflicts that aren't, need to be set in stone in the compendium. It could, these are things for a lot of these that will be relevant to an individual narrative. So, if you're writing about the Podlands and you want to bring up the 300 years ago, there was a famine in this area and this group, therefore, just have this bias against each other even centuries later. We don't need to have a full write-up of that particular conflict. It will be relative within the bounds of that story, and it might be something that gets added to the compendium after that story has been written because it's become relevant, but it's not going to be a global conflict that we need to dig into and have sort of established of, hey, this conflict happened on these dates and everybody on Shoal knows about it. Shoal changed as a result. It's going to be those really big ones that I think we need to give names to and put some details down about. But all of these pressure points are things that can play into our stories, even if we don't go into detail about them in the compendium before we start writing narrative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
everybody knows about the world wars, but depending on where you are in the world, um, I'm inclined to think that there's a large portion of the globe that doesn't give a flying fuck about the War of 1812, for example, because that was
I,
very much a North American thing. So yeah,
But as true as that is for a very large proportion of the world, even if it doesn't directly, it's not something they directly have in their history or care about. It's something whose ramifications have had an effect long term because of what happened with a superpower in the world. it was important to that power, and how that power now uses itself is based on the conflicts that it's lived through. But you're right,
Yeah.
that's the sort of thing where it's okay, yes, this happened, but we don't need to go into huge detail about it because it was mostly relevant to this group, and although it informs how this group now behaves, it's not the same thing as World War II or etc.
I am going to step back to what I said just before we started streaming, just to give our conversation tonight some framework. And I'm going to say that the first war we want to talk about is the war that gave Titans, our mechs, their front and center
Yes.
location
Yes.
in society. This is the war where the rise of the forged cities is just a preamble, because the main issue is that at some point the Shoalies have figured out that without Titans, they're not going to stay relevant in
Yeah.
modern Shoaly society. You
It's
could either embrace Titans or you can die out.
it's that critical point where they realize that the it's the critical point where they realize that industry has become a thing, and either we get on the bandwagon or we are fighting titans with small arms, which isn't going to
I,
work. And it'll
I,
be it'll be the conflict where the first person stops to think, this shit that we've used to stop leviathans, maybe we use it to crack open that city wall.
I am going to say we're going to take a page out of Pacific Rim and say that the one of the main issues, it started with the forged cities. It continued with mad cultists arousing a nether god and directing it somewhere, and continued kind of like Earth Dawn. Have you ever read Earth Dawn, the role playing game?
I know of it.
It's rather ancient. It's the prehistory of the Shadowrun universe.
Yep. Where
And it's
Shadowrun being the sixth world, Earth Dawn is what?
the third or
I think, yeah,
something.
like the third ish.
Yeah, it's like the thing about Earth Dawn is it's a post-apocalyptic world where everyone had to hide in vaults against a rising tale of magical horrors. Okay, the thing about it is that the rise of the horrors stimulated a certain defense mechanism out of society. What I'm thinking is, first we have a mundane conflict. It's they have weapons, they have bigger weapons, they fight. There's whole reasons for it. It changes society, it changes ideals. Great, wonderful. And then at some point, someone introduces something truly horrifying, an atom bomb level um, change to society and dynamics. Uh, like I said, the quiet infested Leviathan of particular and notable size. And then people figure out that if they're not going to develop some manner of defending against it, because walls aren't enough, small massed arms aren't enough, you need something much bigger, much more powerful to deal with it. And that's where military titans and military titan groups comes into the forefront. And once this change has been done, once war had changed, as texts like to say so many times, that is when society adapts, and the way that Titan pilots and handlers become the forefront of society. This is where we opened the door to our modern times.
You know, I almost wish we'd had Tex around just for a little bit of insight on the societal pressures that push nations to war, because as a historian, I'm sure he has great insight. But at the same time, I think we're coming up with some fascinating material with just spitballing ideas as we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's always a ton of good ideas that come from you guys every week.
Okay, particularly nasty solar ejection. First pause. I'm reading what Tire did.
Yeah,
I'm
I
having a
was
look
gonna say
too.
there's a couple things in chat that I want to point out. Samurai talking about misconception that happens from leadership, misconceptions of the leader's image of themselves, perception of their adversary's character, perception of their adversary's intentions, and leaders' view of their adversary's capabilities. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about misconceptions of leadership being a very big part of the messaging that then is made to the general public.
It
I
is
mean,
also
German.
important to remember, however, that some wars break out with the leadership absolutely not on board with it happening, but because the general populace is revolting and etc. So you do also have that, but those are all very critical points and things that we'll need to think about in terms of individual.
I just need to punch German and say that you wanted to say the day the music died, and you just couldn't bring yourself to say it because you know what it'll make people think.
oh my God, you just gave me the horrible idea for a movie equivalent, sci-fi movie equivalent. The what was it? The day the current stood still. The old black and white version, though, the modern one is the modern remake. They got a good actor, but they miscast him badly. Clearly.
All I'm thinking is about Shoaly Pie.
Oh my God.
Oh no. All right. So we know from what we were talking about when we were looking at the Titans last week that we wanted to start out with them being sort of a practical, an extension of technology that was already in place. That they would have been used to make people's, make hard jobs easier. They would have been agricultural, all of that sort of thing. They just started getting more complex and been used for defensive purposes. Probably their first massive use that they evolved towards was dealing with leviathans, and then they became a war thing. Titans were not made for war, they were made for other purposes and then adapted for war, and then we ended up with war titans. So we know we want to start there. And I think Lictor's made some really good points about we need a significant tipping point to make somebody go, fuck it, I'm going to use a Titan to help with this conflict. We've hit that point. I think the Forge cities are a good place to do that. Somebody was talking about maybe using Titans to break down the walls to get in. I think that might be one really sensible reason why Titans first entered war. I'm also thinking that potentially if you end up with, well, we've managed to intercept Forge City trade routes, we've stolen some of their weapons or whatever, but we know that the Forge Cities are going to be predominantly ceratinoid with their powerful exoskeletons and ability to deal with the depths and handle weight. Well, what do you do when you are a squid person who's now in possession of some of these big, weapons that can potentially help deal with this problem, but you can't personally wield them? They're too heavy, the recoil from them, or whatever it is that's going on with them is a problem. Well, we'll mount it on a Titan. The Titan can use it for us. And that's where you then start moving into your first combat pilots who need to be able to use weaponry through a link with a exoskeleton, a Titan, rather than their own self. And that's what helps lead us down that developmental path. How do we feel about that?
You get ceratinoid artillery that requires a rigid exoskeleton to attach to the hard points on, but the podlings are just not robust enough, so exoskeletal tech becomes the way they can mount imported artillery.
And so you're then looking at that on both sides. You've got this sort of escalating arms race. I did
I think
also
we're
like the
looking at
idea of potentially Titans being used to drive a Leviathan at a problem. I like that idea as well.
the way I see it is let's take the Seraginoid and the Podlans. I think that the Podlans built the larger uh, Titans first because they had access to materials that the Seraginoids just did not have en masse. They had, of course, traded for metal, but they could not forge it just as well. The Podlans build big. They understand shells and they understand that they are not strong enough, so they are not hindered by the thought that they should fit and move it. They are aware of their weaknesses and they're compensating for it. The Ceratinoids, however, are building what amounts to be powered armor more than full scale Titans at first. So they're building elementals in Battletech terms, powered armor and minimax, and the Podlans are building full max, but they're building a lot. They're building fewer of them, and they're much more ponderous and less responsive because again they're designed that way. And these designs begin to merge and come into conflict because they do different things to Leviathans. Like if the Ceratinoids seek to enhance their workers, their abilities, we talked about them using prosthetics and stuff like that, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
So they're increasing on that route, and the Podlans are thinking, okay, but what if we are not weak anymore? What if we can make ourselves as strong as we want by building larger and more ornate machines? And these both directions, these are very early directions. This is where they started Titan development. It all comes to a crash and a halt when the Leviathan calamity, when the calamity begins, where the turning point begins, when Leviathan rising from the trenches and devastating city beds and coral and plundering coral reefs, this is when the designs turn to a violent manner first. Titans can have more arms than the Shoal. Yes. Titans can drive Leviathans at a problem. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the ways Titans would be maneuvered into being useful in conflict that's more than just, we can stick weapons on it, though that's obviously a thing.
I have
I think I have a thought.
an idea. Okay, you first. You first.
Beacon, command and control. You sit on top of a huge amount of active coral. You sit someone with oneiromancy or um, luminokinesis, and suddenly you can control your people and relay information over vast different distances that you just can't in any other way. Imagine the benefit of having a CNC, a command and conquer style viewpoint and control over your forces, and the other side cannot. That is beyond immense. This bringing modern warfare capabilities to what is essentially medieval level people.
Yeah.
What was your thought, Aiden?
I've been paying attention to some of the things that Chad has been saying because Ed Gauss, for example, asked if artillery is a thing on Shoal, and there's the discussion of how would projectile weapons work and the like, and that leads me to a consideration that weapons technology would at least as far as Titans go, maybe evolve a bit more slowly as they try and figure out how to scale things up that deal with uh the advent of water and the like. Maybe the big thing, the first time a Titan is used in war isn't direct conflict so much as we've already discussed it, driving a Leviathan towards a target, cracking a city's defenses by pulling a dune basically and riding the sandworm at it, to reference a different setting. And then from there, once they realize that they have the capacity to do that, that's when they start to realize, wait a minute, why don't we cut out the middleman? And then you get somebody who has the Furkakamemi idea of taking a bunch of the heavier, uh, carapace mounted, exoskeletal mounted armaments, and then just putting a absolute fuckload of them on a Titan, similar to how the earliest tanks didn't have what we consider to be a normal tank armament in the modern day. The earliest tanks didn't have the big anti-tank, armor-piercing gun. They were basically pillboxes full of machine guns that could move. So what if the first combat titans are the equivalent to that? They are basically just a place where they could put a shitload of small arms in one point. Rather than having a platoon of dudes with whatever armament you're packing, you've got one mech that can carry a platoon's worth of firepower, which would be especially important if you're suffering a manpower issue. And then the other observation being, how would projectile weapons and artillery work underwater? Because my first thought is they would probably have to figure out the problem of self-propelled munitions to really get effective ballistic weaponry, in the sense that they'd have to figure out how the heck to make torpedoes and then
I
start
think
refining how they can make them more accurate and effective.
I think that this is a problem that is easy to solve relatively.
Send it.
Um, well, the propulsion part is a little harder, and I think it revolves around miniaturizing engines, and these are not these are based on things that can exude heat underwater in extreme temperatures. So they are refining magnesium or something like that that burns underwater, and they cover it in some sort of a biological resin that erodes at the touch of another capsule and provides the short-term burst of energy to deliver the propellant. Again, assume alchemy is involved. Okay, don't quote me on how this works. And the thing is, they don't have ballistic weapons the way we do. They don't have guns that shoot dead bullets. They use explosives a lot because
Yes.
explosives are great underwater. They are wonderful underwater.
Oh yeah, that was going to be my other consideration, is whatever artillery they use is going to be very much rev- instead of using shrapnel or what have you in your basic munitions, you just try and make the biggest boom you can and let cavitation do the rest.
Yeah. And every blast is a hyperbaric blast when you do it underwater.
Yep.
And that is horrifying and terrible. And my God.
Oh yeah. The idea of, so that actually leads me to a fun consideration. What humans consider war crimes and what the Shoal consider war crimes would be very wildly different, especially considering, I mean, we already discussed how the Ceratinoids feel about the value of life given their reproductive tempo and, you know, general disdain for OSHA.
Yeah.
So the Ceratinoids would find the human idea of war crimes quaint by their standards. And frankly, humanity would look at how the Ceratinoids treat warfare, and they would be just disturbed, probably.
I am going to say that um,
Leviathans didn't sign no Geneva Conventions.
the Leviathans do not care. The Leviathans are a problem the same way a nuclear explosion is a problem. He didn't ask you for your address. He just showed up and say, "Hello, I'm here."
Actually, there's another potential flashpoint for conflict. You have a Leviathan was driven off, but the means used to drive it off were entirely unacceptable to the next door neighbors, who now have to deal with the fallout of your fuckery. The
I mean,
contamination or
if
the destruction from your methods to deal with the Leviathan has damaged their home and ecosystem, and they're pissed about it.
I'm going to say that bioengineering is a thing, and if someone developed a particularly virulent strain of the quiet and released it and called it Leaf, or however you say the word for going into silence and into the silence of death with a grin. How
Oh,
do you say that word? Lethe.
Leith.
Leaf. Yes. So imagine a city uh, pressured by the incoming of another god, um, developing a particularly turning its own quiet zone on itself. Uh, Weaponized quiet. Exactly. Just think about it. They took it and made it hyper virulent so it consumes itself, we hope, and unleashed it on the Titan.
yeah.
And every other Shoalie is just looking at you and you
What
did
the fuck did you just
what?
do? Why?
Why?
Why? Do you have any idea what that will do to that entire stretch of ocean?
You did. And what if this thing doesn't consume itself and die out?
We basically just described the
Hyper Ebola.
we no, I was gonna say we just described the oxygen destroyer from Godzilla and the reaction everybody has at its application. They just look at that thing and what it just did to the entire fish population of Tokyo Bay, and they're like, "What in the living fuck did this guy create?"
Meanwhile,
And
Pip snores loud enough your mic is picking it up.
oh, is it? Oh, I'm
Yes!
sorry.
He only just started, but that was very funny. Okay, I think we've put together a lot of things that we're going to want to bear in mind here. Let's see if we can figure out a few specific conflicts that we know we're going to want to have had happen. Known huge conflicts. Because that will give me a lot to work on to write up. So we know that we're going to have the Forge Wars. They're going to be a thing.
Yeah.
They're probably going to lead into an extended period of turmoil, which will be the Titan Wars, where that's going on for a bit. And the Titan Wars will probably lead up to the quiet nuke. And that will be the sort of thing where everyone goes, okay, hold on, we need to calm down a bit here. So,
War of Titan proliferation.
yeah. I feel like it would probably be wise for us also to have some kind of religious war that happens at some point. How do we feel about that?
I think the Forge War are religious.
Okay.
I sincerely think that along with technological development, there is also a society shift.
Yeah, I mean, that's where my mind was
And
sitting, is with what we've decided with the concept of sort of knowledge and banking being the same thing, religious belief being a sort of very knowledge-based concept. There's going to be a conflict of some kind that's going to be huge from that.
I think here's what I'm thinking, just to give you a cliff note. The podlands prior to the Forge Wars are incredibly caste based, with very where you leave your job to your is hereditary, and the way it broke down and became the Forge War is because they knew that there was a leap and bound in technology availability. It crashed the old order of caste. The old caste system was proven to be non-functional in a degree, and from that, at least two or even four different factions. Those who wanted to reform the old caste system, those who wanted to break it down, those who wanted to make a synthesis, and those who wanted to bring together a completely new system brought on from some other faction, non-Podlan faction. And these internal pressures caused at least two different Forge cities to spiral into conflict and draw in each city their allies and their dependents on their technology, on their proliferation, on their everything. And that spirals out of control along trade routes, inflaming more and more groups with a religious ethos in the center.
I mean,
One,
go on. Sorry.
no, please.
I mean, you've got a couple different elements there that are actually very important to bring to mind. The biggest of which is, and this is something that we've seen many times in human history, technology always outstrips, in terms of progress, society and law. New
Right.
technological breakthroughs will occur, and then society will then take a severe shock to the system, potentially, depending on the scope and nature of the tech in question. And then law will struggle to catch up to regulate the new developments so as to try and, rein things in and return to a social equilibrium. So yeah, having new industries pop up will absolutely cause social shock that will cause friction that could lead to conflict, very much like you described. And the other thing is, because of the nature of interspecies and international trade, even before the industry, you'll have different forge cities will have different partners in trade for anything from materials, finished goods, raw resources of the food variety. So you have the Podlin tribe, or a Podlin group that looks at this as like, this is a Ceratinoid war. What the fuck do we care? Until they realized that they were reliant on this one Forge city to provide them a lot of the refined tooling that they need to pursue their own industry. At which point they're like, well, our buddies are about to get shellacked. I guess we need to roll in. Even if it's not officially sponsored by their government, you have militant groups that send themselves out as mercenaries to join the Ceratinoids because their family business is going to be completely sunk if they don't have access to Ceratinoid technology and machinery, et cetera, et cetera. And you could very easily have the ripple effect of the technological revolution happening by one species in one area just cascade into a massive conflict spanning multiple species, multiple nations, for multiple reasons. And it would be a chance for folks to air out old grievances, for new grievances to be made and settled. And like you described earlier, the war that you wanted us to try and put together is one where pretty much everybody has their own slice of the conflict for their own reasons, doing their own thing. I think that would be an ideal way to kickstart that. I think you've got a really good thing going on here.
Thank you. Red, I see you've added something
Yeah, I've
delicious.
been adding a couple while you guys have been talking. Um, I would love us to have a sort of defined war or conflict, at least between some groups or city states or whatever it is that we put into place that's based on a famine. I'd like us to have one that we sort of put into this definitively happened on these dates based on, oh shit, those dudes who moved up onto the land and we thought would never really make a good go of it. Crap, they're about as strong as us now, and now there's the fight over those resources.
I mean, you also would have the first land wars being maybe smaller in scale between the factions of the
Yeah,
race that's
and again,
colonizing.
there's going to be a whole series of conflicts that we don't go into deep detail on, and of course, there's going to be conflict when land is initially being colonized. Who's doing it, what comes out of that. But I feel like there's going to be a larger scale conflict at some point when it's like, oh shit, that is like this new region that's as powerful as all these other pre-established regions, and that will lead to a larger scale conflict that I think we need to actually detail a bit more.
Here's what I'm suggesting about a famine.
I also want a Leviathan war of some kind.
I okay, okay,
I,
okay.
I think that would be another
I
one that would
I,
be good to detail. But go on about the famine idea you have.
I have a thought. In my head, it's called the Purging of Titan City. It's one of these titans that is completely sessile,
Hmm.
a city built around one of the first titans, a completely sessile one. And that city had it good because they had their titan for a long while. They've used it for nearly everything. They had enough armature. In essence, it became a sort of more than one titan built onto and which each other. The thing is, they required a lot of resources to keep it going. They had a very advanced mechanism, but it was bent on acquiring resources from a relatively wide stretch of land. And the famine began because of what is become known as the Leviathan Pack, essentially a group of sub-Leviathan class beasties operating together to become a larger menace, something that is essentially imagine a wolf pack, but on a Leviathan scale. And this thing ravaged trade, leading the Titan City into a slow decline and a quick decline. And when the Titan City fell silent, the hub of connection, the entire area, the entire trade became defunct because all the memory, the library, died. And when the library dies, all commerce is annihilated. And then the real famine broke out, and all the tribes outside of Titan City tried to somehow get into Titan City and reactivate it and gain access to it so they can revitalize it and maybe, try to reactivate the library, regain the old treaties, make a triad society again. Because what happened is that the central bank system died, essentially, in cut and dry idea.
I like those ideas. Those are pretty cool. All right, let's
Yeah.
see what's chat got. Never underestimate a culture's ability to set aside an imminent threat to deal with a petty grievance. Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of the drywall, because of the need to carry greater weight on land, no buoyancy, land animals tend to be stronger than sea creatures. Would that apply to titans? And what would happen when they came back into the sea? Whales moving back into the sea after becoming top predators near instantly. Yep, that'll definitely be something to think about. Will Shoal have an equivalent of the emu war? Probably. I imagine it'll be against some species of crab, knowing you lot.
The sea monkey war.
A swarm of hippo locusts, you say?
Yes,
The
I do
Leviathan
say.
one. Okay, it's coming up towards the end of our time slot. I think we've had a ton of really good ideas come up here. There's certainly a lot for me to work on. What I'll do here is what I've done in previous weeks. I'll take all of these ideas, sort through them in the way that makes the most sense inside my brain, write up what I think is correct. Run it by you guys. Anything you like, we keep. Anything you don't like, we get rid of. Any changes can be applied. And as ever, we can always add to our compendium as things go on, as we write stories, as new things come into play. And we'll go from there. Next week, I don't think we're going to be here. I think next week we're going to skip, and it's going to be for one or two reasons. Reason one might be that Iden and I are at Location Redacted up in the Pac Northwest, potentially meeting up with some other Legion members. But the second reason will be is if I don't go to that, I think I need some time to write up these notes so that we actually have something to go through. This is going to take me longer than the sort of couple of hours to write 2,000 words that I normally would expend of a week. I think I'm going to need some more time with it. So what I might do is skip next week's stream because I might not be here, but if I am here, I've got a lot to do, and we'll come back in 2 weeks. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah. I might apply for the slot to babble about my own stuff then.
I would have no issue with that. If you want to take over the stream slot for a couple of hours, Lictor, your stuff's always interesting.
It's either that or if we are available, I yoink it for Subnautica.
That could
What?
also work.
Yes.
All right, so
Yes.
we have some options. So it sounds like something will occur next Friday. We're not sure what, but it won't be Shoal because I need some time to work on all of the cool ideas you guys have thrown at me. It seems like everybody's
Yes.
okay with that. Before we disappear off, do you guys want to see what I've been working on art-wise?
Yes.
All right, let me bring that up.
But
One
Jeff,
thing
but
I think legally, love, you can't tease it like you did at the start of stream and not show it.
I mean, I don't think the police are going to come after me if I don't, but... All right, so this week I have been working a lot on wrestling stuff. I've updated the Beeple Chan poster. We've got our full Team Moowoon poster, which if you were at WBPLW last Sunday, you probably saw. We now have individual posters for Sailor Moon Moon, Kuki Kun, and Mochimeka. And I'm currently working on Cargonia.
Land of stolen things.
Land of suplex things in this case, I believe. So I am steadily working on this. Shredded checkers is just a thing in my head now. I've probably still got some editing work to do, but so, we are slowly working on that. I'm hoping to get it finished within the next 24 hours or so, and then that gives me all of Sunday morning to try and make the opening to WBPLW a little bit cooler than it currently is. That's the plan. Whether it will happen or not, I don't know, but that is what I have been up to this week, aside from just Shoal things. So.
Hashtag
wanted-
shoal things.
I wanted to create a character that only speaks in 3 words: gun, cargo.
Gun cargo.
Gun, cargo. They only say gun, car, or go, or a combination thereof.
I think they should also be allowed to say move freight.
Go gun.
Go, gun, go, car. Gun, car.
Cargo. Go
Freight.
gun.
Go, car. Go, 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 gun, go.
Go
gun.
gadget cargo gun.
Yes, it's very important. Miners don't die.
Miners don't die.
That is not very buff squick. That would be Leith. I have adapted. Let me open it. Give me just a moment. I have my tablet right next to me.
You're making a Pokemon.
Do I have? Yes, I do. That would be Leith Skarma, who Leith's player very, very kindly asked me if I would do a reference sheet for them. So that is Leith.
Yes.
Yes, buff Leith, not Mommy Squick. Correct. I refuse to draw Mommy Squick.
Good.
The thought of
Thank you.
Mommy Squick hurts my brain meat.
You know what else
That's
I think we
okay.
need to look at before we go? I think we need... Okay, I'm going to have to find it from my file structure. We don't want to be there. Are you going to open this for me? Or are you going to think about it? There we go. There is Sailor Moon standalone.
Oh my god.
Perfect.
So
The
yes, as you can
mustache.
see, it has
The-
been the little
beard.
goatee, the beard.
Yes, wonderful.
I have had the
Excellent.
most productive week. I've done the most important things it is possible for a human being to do. I hope you have enjoyed this brief look at my nonsense and that you will join us for WBPLW on Sunday at 9 p.m, where I will be endeavouring to run predictions without messing them up for once. All right, we are at the end of our time slot. We are going to get out of here. We're going to let you guys go on to have hopefully a wonderful afternoon. I believe Tex and Depp will be up in about half an hour's time, so get yourself some drinks, settle in. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for starting it with me, and I will see you guys next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.